The cameras rolled live on Fox and Friends, the studio lights washing over Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as he leaned forward in his chair, his voice even, his gaze unflinching, the nation reeling from the horrifying shooting in Minneapolis. Just a day earlier, viewers expected compassion, reflection, maybe even a call for unity. Instead, what they got was something else entirely. Kennedy's words cut through the broadcast with chilling detachment. He didn't focus on the grieving families, the shattered community, or the epidemic of gun violence that had stolen yet another sacred space. No, he pivoted sharply, linking the tragedy to antidepressants, to SSRIs, to the medications taken by countless Americans. In that moment, millions of viewers could feel the audacity. This wasn't mourning, this was opportunism. A national nightmare was being turned into a talking point. The hosts shifted in their seats, their faces betraying unease. Brian Kilmeade had nodded, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Social media began buzzing, instantly clips racing onto Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Screenshots of Kennedy's words circulated with captions like, "Did he really just say this?" The public mood was clear. Disbelief, then outrage. And then, as if on cue, came the thunderclap. Senator Tina Smith, representing the very state where the bloodshed had just occurred, broke the dam. With grief still raw in her community, she didn't mince words. Her tweet landed like a punch to the gut. "I dare you to go to Annunciation School and tell our grieving community, in effect, guns don't kill kids, antidepressants do. Just shut up. Stop peddling bull asterisk, you should be fired." Asterisk, the message spread like wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags trended. Hashtag shut up RFK. Hashtag conspiracy over compassion. What Kennedy had framed as calm science talk was being reframed by a furious senator as cruelty disguised as expertise. This wasn't policy debate, it was moral indictment. Narrator, this wasn't just political disagreement, it was a grieving senator drawing a line in the sand. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because what happened next would transform one reckless comment into a defining public humiliation. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was no stranger to controversy. His appointment as Secretary of Health and Human Services had divided the nation from the start. To his supporters, he was a crusader, unafraid to question the pharmaceutical giants. To his critics, he was a conspiracy theorist in a suit, a man willing to bend science to fit suspicion. And in this moment, live on national television. Those suspicions seemed to find their proof, because this wasn't just a pundit's hot take. Kennedy was speaking as the face of America's health leadership. The man entrusted with guiding the nation through crises of medicine, public safety, and trust. His calm but chilling assertion that antidepressants, not easy access to guns, might be fueling mass shootings wasn't simply rhetoric. It was policy shaping itself in real time. Words with the power to alter research priorities, legislative debates, and the lives of millions who rely on these very medications to survive. That's why Senator Tina Smith's response hit like a lightning strike. Her anger was not a fleeting outburst, nor a partisan jab across the aisle. It was something deeper and unflinching defense of her grieving state. Minnesota wasn't just a dot on the map in this tragedy. It was a community in mourning, a community that deserved dignity, not deflection. Smith's fury reframed the moment. This wasn't about her versus Kennedy. It was about truth versus spin, accountability versus distraction, and America noticed. On Twitter, the clip of Kennedy's words replayed endlessly, captioned with disbelief. One post read, "A school is mourning, and this is what he chooses to say?" Another, "Your job is to protect lives, not excuse their loss." And came the hashtags digital bonfires igniting in real time. Hashtag shut up RFK number truth, overspin hashtag guns, not pills, they climbed the trending charts, amplifying outrage from every corner of the political spectrum. Mental health advocates, doctors, grieving parents, and everyday citizens joined forces in a rare chorus of condemnation. What Kennedy thought might pass as measured commentary instead landed as a betrayal of trust. Narrator, this wasn't about a soundbite tit, was about who gets to define the cause of violence in America. Would it be the grieving communities demanding action, or a political figure shifting blame toward the most vulnerable? And just when RFK Jr. thought his words would be absorbed into the endless churn of political chatter, the backlash erupted with a force that not only challenged his credibility, but threatened to dismantle the very narrative he was trying to build. Robert Kennedy Jr. carried one of the most powerful names in American politics, a name that evoked tragedy, legacy, and service. But unlike the Kennedys who came before him, his path was marked less by public duty than by public provocation. For decades, he had stood not as a healer of divisions, but as a lightning rod. Wielding controversy like a weapon, from the beginning, RFK Jr. seemed destined for influence. Privilege opened every door. Elite schools, political circles that bent. Around his last name, a microphone that was always waiting for his voice. But instead of using that platform to advance unity or truth, he gravitated toward the shadows of suspicion where science bent beneath ideology, and certainty was replaced. With conspiracy, the flashpoints of his career were as notorious as they were predictable. His crusade against vaccines turned him into a household name for all the wrong reasons. He warned of dangers that mainstream science had already disproven. He framed public health experts as pawns of big pharma. Every time tragedy struck, a pandemic, a mass shooting, a crisis of trust, RFK Jr. seemed ready with a theory that shifted attention away from systemic solutions and toward convenient scapegoats. And yet, his delivery was always calm, almost hypnotic. He spoke with the cadence of authority, as if his last name alone validated his claims. On talk shows, at rallies, even in official hearings, he had mastered the art of pseudoscience dressed in conviction. His arguments rarely withstood scrutiny. But that was never the point. The point was to plant doubt, to blur lines between fact and fiction until the public no longer knew what to believe. Flashback. A decade earlier, when measles outbreaks re-emerged in American schools, Kennedy gave interviews blaming vaccines more than misinformation. Parents have a right to question what goes into their child's body, he said, ignoring the communities ravaged by diseases once eradicated. Public health officials pleaded with him to reconsider. Instead, he doubled down. Another flashback. During the height of the opioid crisis, when families demanded accountability from pharmaceutical giants, Kennedy's remarks veered toward psychiatric drugs. He implied that antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications might be fueling violence and addiction. To grieving families, it felt like salt in the wound and erasure of corporate responsibility, replaced by stigmatization of the vulnerable. Again and again, the pattern revealed itself. Deflection, dressed as inquiry. Conspiracy, cloaked as concern. Every crisis became an opportunity to redirect the blame onto medicine, science, or those already suffering. And because he spoke with the gravitas of a Kennedy, networks kept inviting him back. Asterisk, but behind the calm exterior. Critics saw something darker. A man who had built a career on undermining the very institutions he was supposed to strengthen. As HHS secretary, this tendency became more than provocative, became dangerous. His words were not just sound bites, but signals of where taxpayer dollars, government studies, and national focus would be directed. So when he sat in that Fox News studio and linked the Minneapolis shooting to antidepressants, it wasn't an accident. It was a continuation of a lifetime strategy. Reframe tragedy, redirect blame, and reassert his own authority. Only this time, the stakes were too high, and the backlash was waiting. Narrator, for years, RFK Jr. wielded controversy like a weapon. Each claim, each deflection, a reminder of how power can twist truth. But this time, it backfired. Because this time, he was up against someone who refused to stay silent. Tina Smith's story did not begin in the marble halls of Washington, nor in the echoing chambers of national TV studios. It began in the neighborhoods of Minnesota, where community was not just an idea, but a lived reality. She was not born into a dynasty or carried forward by the weight of a name recognized across continents. She carved her path through grassroots work, through late nights at church basements and school board meetings, through face-to-face conversations with people whose voices were too often overlooked. Her earliest work as an organizer gave her a reputation for quiet diligence. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was the one who listened, the one who remembered details, the one who came back after the cameras left. People trusted her because she showed up not just when it was easy, but when it was painful, when it was personal, when it was hard. That foundation built the senator she would later become calm, steady, measured. Yet beneath that calm exterior was a steel spine, a refusal to let the dignity of her people be trampled by arrogance or detached rhetoric. Up to Minnesotans, she was not just another politician. They saw her as someone who understood the pain of their losses and the pride of their resilience. Her rise to the U.S. Senate came not as the culmination of a lifelong quest for power, but as a call to service. She had been a lieutenant governor, a policy strategist, a community advocate. Each role deepened her connection to the people she served. When tragedy struck, whether it was a flood, devastating small towns, or violence shaking urban schools, she was there not with theories, not with abstract deflections, but with presence. And it was that presence that gave her words authority. When grief struck again in Minneapolis, the community was reeling. Families mourned children who should have been safe in their church, their school, their playground. The city was heavy with sorrow, searching for answers that could help them heal and prevent the next tragedy. Into that silence came Robert F. Kennedy Jr., speaking not from the heart of the grieving community, but from the distant perch of privilege. His calm detachment linking antidepressants to gun violence landed like a slap to families who had buried their loved ones. It sounded less like leadership and more like dismissal, as though the real crisis, the flood of guns in America, were an afterthought. For Tina Smith, it was intolerable. She had sat in those pews with families who lost children. She had spoken with teachers who feared every morning that their classroom could become the next headline. Authenticity came from more than office or title, came from the lived reality of Minnesota. Faith leaders who opened their doors to her, parents who cried in her arms, schools that invited her in not as a politician, but as a neighbor. When she spoke, she carried those voices with her. That was the contrast. RFK Jr. carried the weight of a dynasty, a name that shielded him even when his words stumbled. Tina Smith carried something heavier, the grief of her people, and the duty to protect them from harm compounded by lies. Her reputation in Washington had always been one of restraint. She was not the senator known for explosive speeches or headline-grabbing outbursts. But those who underestimated her mistook calm for weakness. In truth, she was like the northern rivers of her home state, quiet on the surface, but with currents, powerful enough to reshape the land. So when she saw RFK's comments begin to spread across airwaves and timelines, she knew she could not let them go unchallenged. To stay silent would be to let the grief of her people be twisted into fodder for pseudoscience. And so she answered not with a meandering defense, not with cautious words, but with a clear, sharp rebuke. Her tweet hit like a thunderclap. I dare you to go to Annunciation School and tell our grieving community? In effect, guns don't kill kids. Antidepressants do. Just shut up. Stop peddling bulls, asterisk. You should be fired. Asterisk, it was not the style the nation had come to expect from her. But that was what made it powerful. The words did not come from a desire for attention, but from the breaking point of a woman who had heard enough. Narrator. This wasn't just a senator. It was a daughter of Minnesota, carrying her community's grief into the spotlight. And when RFK's words spread, she was ready with truth sharp enough to cut through the noise. The cameras flickered on, capturing the kind of live broadcast where history either cements reputations or shatters them. The studio was hushed, the tension palpable. Everyone knew this was no ordinary interview. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., already reeling from Tina Smith's viral rebuke, had returned to defend himself. And sitting across from him, calm, collected, and unflinching, was the senator who had told him to shut up. RFK leaned forward, his voice deliberately even, as if rehearsed. We cannot ignore the role that SSRIs and other psychiatric drugs play in acts of violence. This isn't about guns alone. Evidence is clear these drugs alter minds, create instability. If we don't address that, we're turning a blind eye to science. The words landed with the clinical detachment of a lecture, but the weight of the room did not bend in his favor. There was a ripple of unease among the anchors, a subtle shift in the air. It wasn't conviction they heard, it was deflection. Tina Smith waited. She didn't interrupt, didn't meet his rising cadence with one of her own. Instead, when he finished, she leaned in just slightly, her voice steady, cutting through the haze like a blade through smoke. Stop deflecting. This is about guns. The sentence hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The anchors froze. One actually glanced off camera as if searching for cues on how to react. The crowd watching from home felt the silence sharpen. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Calm, firm, unshaken. RFK shifted in his chair. Senator, with respect, you're ignoring decades of data. These drugs, Smith raised her hand slightly, not to silence him but to hold the moment. With respect, Secretary, I'm not ignoring science. I'm listening to the families who just buried their children. I'm listening to teachers who tell me they're afraid every day they go to school. They're not afraid of antidepressants. They're afraid of guns, the crowd murmured. Social media feeds lit up instantly, clips clipped in real time. Split-screen Kennedy's strained attempt at authority against Smith's calm defiance became a perfect image of a nation's argument condensed to two faces. Kennedy's voice rose, sharper now, his practiced calm beginning to fray. If we keep blaming guns without looking at all the contributing factors, we will never solve this crisis. You're politicizing tragedy. Smith didn't flinch. Her eyes were steady, her tone measured. No, Mr. Secretary. What politicizes? Tragedy is standing in front of grieving families and blaming their medication instead of the weapon that killed their children. It was a reversal. For years, Kennedy had thrived on flipping narratives, casting himself as the misunderstood truth-teller against the establishment. But here, in this moment, the role was reversed, was the one sounding evasive, the one leaning. On talking points that felt hollow against the raw humanity Smith brought to the table, the anchors could sense it. The audience at home could sense it. Kennedy's composure was cracking, not in a scream, not in a meltdown, but in the small betrayals of a man realizing he was losing control of the story. His jaw tightened. His hand clenched slightly against the desk. His rebuttals came quicker, more scattered. Meanwhile, Smith's calm only deepened. Every time he raised his voice, she lowered hers, forcing the audience to lean in, to listen, to feel the gravity of her words. It was the same strategy she had always employed in community halls and grieving school. Gyms never meet noise with more noise, meet it with truth. Narrator, the room knew it was about to explode. And then, with the nation watching, came the mic drop moment. The camera framed them both, the split-screen battle of composure versus collapse. Kennedy leaned forward, still pressing, still clinging to the argument that had carried him through countless interviews before. But this time, the weight of his words felt hollow, tinny, mismatched against the scale of the tragedy they were discussing. Tina Smith adjusted her papers not out of nervousness, but out of precision. Then she looked directly at him. Her voice did not rise. It did not crack. It carried the calm fury of a parent who has had enough. Mr. Secretary, let's be very clear about what's happening here, she began, every syllable measured. You are distracting. You are turning the eyes of this country away from the real crisis, away from the real weapon that is killing our kids, pointing it, instead, at medicine that saves lives. Asterisk, the air tightened. Even the hosts, accustomed to managing heated exchanges, went silent. She had taken the reins of the conversation, and there was no pulling them back. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably, his mouth opening as if to interject, but Smith pressed forward, her tone rising only a fraction, enough to slice through the studio silence. There are 400 million guns in this country, she said, her voice resonant, deliberate. 400 million more guns than people. And you have the audacity to stand here and tell grieving parents that the problem is their children's medication. Not the assault rifles? Not the easy access to weapons designed for war? No, you want to blame the pills in their bathroom cabinets. Gasps rippled through the studio. The anchors froze, caught between their duty to moderate and their inability to stop what was unfolding. The tension in Kennedy's jaw tightened. His face reddened. Beads of sweat collecting just beneath the glare of the studio lights. Smith leaned closer, her voice softening now, deadly in its precision. "Tell our children's parents it was the medicine," she said. The words dripped. With gravity, each one a dagger. Look them in the eye. "Tell the mother who just buried her son that it was the Prozac and not the gun that tore through his classroom. Tell the father who will never walk his daughter down the aisle that her antidepressants, not the AR-15, are to blame. And then see if you can stand their gaze." The studio fell into stunned silence, not the awkward kind, not the lull of a break. A silence heavy enough to feel in the chest, as though the entire room had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. Kennedy blinked. His lips parted, searching for words, but no words came. The man who had spent a career spinning, reframing, redirecting, was suddenly stripped bare. His talking points dissolved under the sheer force of Smith's moral clarity. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a rant. It was worse for him. It was calm, surgical destruction. One of the anchor's breaking instinct whispered audibly into a hot mic. "Wow." On Twitter, the clip had already begun to circulate. Someone had posted it under the caption, "This is what accountability looks like." Another, "Smith just ended RFK in real time." Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag mic drop Smith. Hashtag truth over spin. Hashtag shut up RFK. But inside the studio, the impact was more immediate. A murmur rolled through the live audience, a low rumble that built into applause. People weren't just clapping for a clever retort. They were clapping because they had seen something. Rare, dignity-demolishing deflection. Kennedy tried once more to regain footing. His voice cracked as he attempted to return to the science, to couch his words in the authority of data. "Senator, the research shows," but Smith interrupted, not with volume, but with devastating calm. "The research shows," she repeated, "that America is 10 times more likely to lose children in schools and playgrounds than any other developed nation. That's the data that matters. That's the science you refuse to acknowledge because it doesn't fit your distraction." The anchor turned his head sharply, his eyes darting between them, as though he too understood that what they were witnessing wasn't just debate, it was demolition. Narrator, it wasn't just a rebuttal, it was the truth laid bare in front of millions. Kennedy's shoulders slumped slightly. His hands fumbled with his notes. The spin master, the heir of one of America's most storied families, sat cornered not by insults, not by mockery, but by something far more unshakable, unfiltered truth. The nation watched, and they knew. As the segment wound down, the anchors tried to transition, but the moment refused to end. The applause, the murmurs, the viral clips already pinging across phones, it was alive. It's electric, unstoppable. The cameras cut to commercial, but it was too late. The damage was done. Kennedy had walked into the studio hoping to reframe a tragedy as a debate over drugs. Instead, he had been reframed. His composure was shattered, his credibility questioned, his authority stripped. And Tina Smith, calm, resolute, unwavering, had turned grief into power, and power into truth. Narrator, but this firestorm didn't end in the studio, it swept across the nation. The moment the broadcast ended, the internet ignited. Within minutes, Tina Smith's sharp rebuke of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was clipped, captioned, and uploaded to every platform imaginable. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels, all flooded with the same 30 seconds. Kennedy fumbling with his notes, red-faced, while Smith, steady and unwavering, delivered the words that seemed to pierce the nation's conscience. Tell their parents it was the medicine. That single line became the rallying cry. Hashtags erupted across timelines. Hashtag mic drop Smith, hashtag truth over spin, hashtag shut up RFK. By the end of the day, her words had been viewed tens of millions of times. The memes came next. Some showed side-by-side stills, Smith, calm and laser-focused, Kennedy, blinking and sweating under the studio lights. Others exaggerated his fumbling hands, looping the moment he dropped his pen as a metaphor for losing the argument. On TikTok, Creators stitched her takedown with reaction shots, gasping, clapping, or shaking their heads in disbelief. Late-night comedians wasted no time. On The Daily Show, the host played the clip twice before adding, "You know you've lost." When the studio audience claps against you and you're the one with the government title, Jimmy Kimmel dubbed it the quietest, most devastating shutdown in TV history. Even Stephen Colbert, raising an eyebrow, quipped, "RFK Jr. wanted to talk about side effects. You just experienced one. Public humiliation." But this wasn't just about laughs. The reaction reached deeper. Parents of school shooting victims shared the clip, thanking Smith for refusing to let the conversation be derailed. Activists reposted it with captions like, "This is leadership. This is courage." One viral thread from a teacher read, "Tina Smith didn't just argue with RFK. She spoke for every educator who's had to practice lockdown drills with 8-year-olds. She said what we've been screaming for years. Even faith leaders, often hesitant to step into political mud, rallied behind her." A pastor in Minneapolis wrote, "Senator Smith carried our grief into the spotlight. She didn't politicize it, she dignified it. She gave voice to the sacred truth that our children are not statistics, not lab experiments, but souls deserving safety." Meanwhile, Kennedy's image crumbled under the weight of ridicule. Clips of him stammering circulated under mocking captions. "When the science guy gets schooled on common sense." A trending TikTok soundbite remixed his silence after Smith's mic drop into a looping beat. He had become a meme, not a leader. Narrator, this wasn't just a TV clash, it was a cultural reckoning. The broader implications soon became undeniable. News panels debated whether Kennedy's comments had exposed a fatal flaw in his leadership style, his reliance on pseudoscience and contrarian takes to explain away crises. Editorials piled on. The New York Times ran with, "When deflection meets dignity." While the Washington Post wrote, "Smith didn't just shut him down, she shifted the conversation." The ripple effect was everywhere. For young progressives, Smith became a symbol of authenticity, the rare politician who cut through noise without descending into it. For parents, she became a voice of moral clarity. For activists, she became proof that truth spoken calmly and directly could still triumph on the biggest stage. And yet, beneath the noise, the applause, the laughter, the hashtag something, deeper was stirring. Because this wasn't just about Kennedy's humiliation. It wasn't just about Smith's sharp retort. It was about a nation, weary of endless spin, hungry for honesty. Finally seeing a glimpse of what leadership could look like. Narrator, and yet, beneath the noise, the deepest meaning was still waiting to emerge. When the frenzy of hashtags and late-night jokes began to settle, what lingered wasn't just Tina Smith's sharp rebuke of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It was the clarity of the truth she had laid bare. She had not allowed grief to be twisted into a talking point, nor allowed fear to be weaponized into distraction. Instead, she reframed the entire debate with one unwavering principle. This is about guns, it's not scapegoats. On the Senate floor days later, Smith expanded her words with the same steady tone that had silenced the Fox studio. "When tragedy strikes," she said, "we can choose honesty or we can choose evasion. We can choose to confront the reality that 400 million guns are in circulation in this country, or we can try to blame medicine, mental health, or anything else that shifts the burden away from accountability. But every deflection costs lives. Every dodge dishonors the families left behind." Her message struck deeper than policy. It was moral. Kennedy's arrogance had collided with her dignity. The collision revealed a timeless truth. Arrogance always crumbles in the presence of calm conviction. He came armed with theories. She came armed with empathy. He sought to control the narrative. She sought to honor the grieving. And when the dust settled, only one voice carried weight. Narrator, this wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder that America's soul is not defined by spectacle, but by integrity and compassion. Across the nation, that reminder resonated. Parents who had lost children to gun violence wrote that Smith's words made them feel seen. Finally, after years of political evasions, young activists replayed her clip before marching into rallies, chanting not just about laws, but but about dignity. Even those who disagreed on policy admitted she had spoken from a place beyond partisanship, a place rooted in humanity itself, because, in the end, leadership isn't measured in sound bites or spin, it's measured in the courage to tell the truth when it's easiest to lie. Kennedy, with all his privilege and contrarian polish, chose spin. Smith, carrying the grief of Minnesota, chose truth. And in that choice lay the universal lesson that the real power does not belong to those who shout the loudest, deflect the quickest. It belongs to those who speak truth with calm conviction, even when the room is boiling with tension, even when the stakes are unbearably high. The clip of her takedown became more than a viral moment. It became a parable. Teachers replayed it in classrooms to show what composure looks like under pressure. Faith leaders quoted her in sermons, connecting her insistence on truth to timeless calls for justice. Families sat together, nodding at her courage, whispering to one another, "This is what leadership looks like." Narrator, for every moment when arrogance rises, there is a chance for dignity to answer. And when it does, arrogance always falls. But even as the nation applauded, there was a lingering awareness. This wasn't the end of the story. It was a glimpse, a single chapter in a fight much larger than one senator and one secretary. Guns remain. The grief continues. And the battle over truth in America is far from finished. Smith herself acknowledged it. This moment isn't about me or about one debate. It's about who we are willing to be as a nation. Do we cling to excuses, or do we find the courage to confront reality? And as her words echoed across the country, the answer was not yet clear. Narrator, but this battle was only one chapter in the greater fight for America's future. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tried to spin tragedy into politics, but Senator Tina Smith refused to let it stand. In one viral moment, she transformed grief into power, arrogance into accountability, and distraction into truth. What began as reckless words on live TV ended as a defining humiliation, one that reminded America of the difference between hollow spin and authentic leadership. Because at the heart of this clash wasn't just a policy debate, it was a battle for moral clarity. Kennedy reached for excuses. Smith reached for integrity. He tried to deflect. She stood firm. And when the dust settled, the truth triumphed. Narrator, this is what happens when arrogance collides with dignity. Arrogance falls. And now, the choice isn't just theirs, it's ours. We are the audience, the voters, the parents and children who live with the consequences of these debates. We cannot afford to stay silent when excuses are louder than accountability. We cannot let leaders escape responsibility by shifting blame onto anything and everything but the real crisis. So here's the call. If you believe in truth over spin, in dignity over arrogance, in leadership rooted in compassion and courage, be part of this movement. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story. Add your voice to the millions demanding accountability, honesty, and justice in American politics. Because this fight is bigger than one debate. It's about the very soul of our nation, and together, brick by brick, voice by voice, we will write the next chapter of America's promise.